Good afternoon. I'm John Felchicchio, the Acting Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development, and we wanted to welcome you to the Phase 1 Telephone Town Hall. We are having a little bit of technical difficulty with our call tool, so what we're going to do is we're going to get started with our presentation from DC Health and DDOT, and we'll ask folks if you're watching on our stream on Channel 16 or you're watching on Facebook or Twitter, that we actually get questions in by tweeting or posting on Facebook, on the Facebook Live, and we'll start taking those questions. But first up, we do have a presentation. You know that this week the mayor announced that we were going to reimagine public spaces to support restaurants, retail, and recreation during Phase 1. And we have with us Jeff Meridian, the director of DDOT, and Sean Townsend, the director of the Mayor's Office of Nightlife and Culture, to brief us on that. But then before we get started with that, we wanted to talk about the health guidance for restaurants. It's listed on our website, which is coronavirus.dc.gov/phase1. But we have with us from DC Health, Arian Gibson and Preetha Iyengar, who are going to walk through the guidance from DC Health and what you need to know as you reopen. So I'll kick it over to them and we'll get started there. Thank you.
So good afternoon. I'm Arian Gibson, Associate Director of the Office of Food Safety, Community Hygiene, and Radiation within DC Health. So we just want to highlight that even though we are reopening the restaurants, this is a reopen light, which means that we want to take the same principles that we've been applying at home and apply it when we go out to these food establishments. So it's because of your hard work, the residents and the food establishments in the District of Columbia, that we are where we're at today. And we strongly encourage you guys to continue practicing social distancing, continue separating, continue staying separate, and just continue the same practices. As it pertains to dining, there'll be outdoor dining only in Phase 1. Tables and patrons should be at least 6 feet apart. No queuing allowed, which means you would have to get a reservation. If they walk up to your food establishment and they want to be seated, it's okay. You still have to take their information so that we have it for contact tracing. But if there are no tables available, they're not allowed to queue. No buffets, salad bars, or communal serving areas, and no live music or any activities that would encourage clustering. Cleaning and sanitizing. So I know that being in a food establishment, you already are doing increased cleaning and sanitizing, and some of those principles that you're already required to do will still continue to apply. Food contact surfaces must be cleaned at least every 2 hours. Frequently touched surfaces every 4 to 6 hours and between uses. And all table items must either be single-use items or either clean and sanitized between uses. So this would include items like condiments, tablecloths, things like that. And when you sanitize or use the disinfectant, you're required to use disinfectant that has been approved to fight COVID-19 by CDC. For employee screening, so you are required to screen employees before they come to work. So you would ask them certain questions, such as, have you been in contact with someone that's ill? Are you feeling ill? Do you have recent taste loss or recent loss of smell? So it's important to screen your employees before their shift. And I know the big question is, what should I do if employees are positive? So employees are positive, be prepared to close your establishment for 24 to 48 hours. You need to do a thorough cleaning and sanitizing of the entire facility. Contact DC Health at food.safety@dc.gov. And the employee that tested positive must be excluded until they're cleared to return by their healthcare provider and by DC Health. If you have employees that were exposed to someone who had COVID-19, it's important that they remain quarantined for at least 14 days from the time of exposure. Okay.
Great. Next up, we want to have Jeff Meridian walk us through kind of the reimagining of public space for restaurants, retail, and recreation.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. As Mayor Bowser announced earlier today, we will be reimagining the way that our curbside space, our sidewalks, our roadways look in order to support the needs of our restaurants and businesses. Restaurants that are already permitted with sidewalk cafe licenses are able to operate those right away. We also are expanding our program to include those that don't currently have those permits. And we will be doing that on a case-by-case, block-by-block basis in order to accommodate the different needs of different types of businesses. Retailers may apply for space for curbside pickup as well, and that all of the information that's necessary for those applications can be found on coronavirus.dc.gov/phase 1. We also have available on our website the types of spaces that are possible and what's everything that's necessary in order for you to get the necessary permits. We, as the mayor said earlier today, are going to do this in an expedited time frame so that we can get everything that you need to you in order to operate effectively. Additionally, we have information available about outdoor dining, what's required in order to safely do this for your customers as well as for staff. It's important to remember to always be wearing a mask. Of course, not required to do so while eating and drinking. All diners must be seated. We're not allowing for standing space in outdoor spaces. No more than 6 people at a table, and the tables themselves must be 6 feet apart. Games and other activities that lead to close contact are prohibited. For a complete list of all the requirements and criteria, please visit coronavirus.dc.gov/phase 1.
Thanks, Jeff. So we have been getting some questions online, so you could do that on Twitter or on Facebook. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag DCHope, and that'll allow us to track those. So the first question that we have is about, as for DC Health, is about employees and the use of gloves. Do employees need to wear gloves at all times?
So employees do not need to wear gloves at all times. They should be using gloves as appropriate for food safety requirements, but they should be, with respect to coronavirus, they should be wearing a mask at all times, but the gloves, again, are just for food safety requirements.
And so like a hostess, does the hostess have to wear?
No.
Even though they're touching the menus and things like that, hostesses would not have to. Could you kind of walk through that a little bit?
So if a hostess is interacting as they interact with each different set of customers that come, they should be performing frequent hand hygiene whenever they feel like it is needed. So hand hygiene supplies like alcohol-based hand rub should be available readily for all staff, but that is preferable not wearing gloves.
And as far as it pertains to food safety, they should be wearing gloves whenever they're handling ready-to-eat food items.
And was that the appropriate way to take off a mask? Because I know that Dr. Nesbitt likes to tell us not to pull it down, but to pull it over. Is that right?
And also remove it completely when you're not using it.
Could you go over that with folks too?
Yeah, so, and I was going to say we should probably have alcohol hand rub here when we're removing our masks. The appropriate procedures to use the ear loops to put it on behind your ears and perform hand hygiene. And anytime you touch your mask, you should perform hand hygiene, which is again rubbing your hands with alcohol-based hand rub and then waiting until it dries.
Thank you. The next question is actually related to restaurants with liquor licenses. Sean, can you walk us through the requirements about reservations?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. So restaurants that currently have an ABRA endorsement for a sidewalk cafe and or a summer garden and they have a sidewalk cafe permit from DDOT do not have to apply through the DDOT through the registration portal. However, if you do not have currently do not have a sidewalk cafe, then you will be applying through the registration portal as well. So we want to encourage all businesses that currently wish to apply or utilize outdoor space to submit that information through the registration portal that can be found at coronavirus.dc.gov /phase 1.
Great. And then question for DDOT about will outdoor space permit fees be waived or reduced as part of this application process?
Yes, we will be waiving the fees for this purpose during the public health emergency.
And then can you clarify, I think this is for Sean, customers just can't be there to drink, that there has to be food service as well. Can you walk us through that?
Yes. So the requirement, the ABRA requirement for ABC establishments is that one food item must be ordered at each table. So a party of 4 or a party of 6, which is the maximum, will need to order at least one food item from the establishment in order to be served alcoholic beverages.
Great. And we are now able to take questions on the phone. So if you have a question, the way that you get in the queue for that is to press 0. So if you're listening on the phone and you want to ask a question, press 0. If you're watching on Channel 16 or on Facebook or Twitter on those streams, use the hashtag DCHope, and we'll get those questions in as well. So another question about refusing service if someone does not have a mask. DC Health, do you want to talk through that a little bit?
I can say that the DC Health recommendation is that all patrons who visit a restaurant should be wearing a mask when they are not eating or drinking. So when they're sitting at their table and eating, they do not need to be wearing a mask. However, if they get up to go to the bathroom, they should have their mask on, and staff should also have their mask on at all times.
Thank you. And then what testing is available to employees? I could take a crack at this because I know that we have additional testing that's opening on Monday at F Street between 4th and 5th Streets Northwest. That testing is actually going to be no reservation, no appointment necessary in order to access the testing. And also, if someone feels that they need a test, they can get a test. So that's the way that we're handling the testing for going forward. And we also will have additional testing resources that will continue to update on coronavirus.dc.gov, and there's a tab there for testing. The next question is about, can you walk us through best practices of cleaning materials for outdoor service? Can we use menus twice if we disinfect?
Yes. So for cleaning, it should be soap and water. When we talk about disinfecting and sanitizing, it has to be an approved disinfectant from approved by CDC to fight coronavirus. And what was the second question?
So the second question was, can menus be used again if they're disinfected?
Yes, we do recommend single-service menus, or maybe putting your menu on your website so that the customers can see it from their smart device. But yes, if you clean and disinfect the menu between each use, you can use it again.
Okay.
Cleaning products, you can find the link on the CDC website, but it's the FDA-approved List N, as in Nancy. That's the list that has the ability to kill coronavirus. And then also, when you are cleaning menus, when you're using any disinfectant product, make sure you're reading the label, because you have to allow that disinfectant to sit for a certain amount of time in order for it to be effective. So make sure you're buying the appropriate product and then reading the instructions so you know that the disinfection is effective.
And then a question about, I think, Sean, if you could help us with this one. Customers who are there to drink alone or to drink, can they just drink? Do they have to order food?
They must order food. It's a requirement by ABRA that you cannot just go to order drinks. You have to order at least one food item.
Okay. And then a question about can a restaurant take a customer's temperature in order to keep their employees safe?
So taking temperature, so what we are recommending is that people are screened, that your staff is screened as they come in. And you can implement screening for like a checklist type of screening. If you want to screen fevers by checking a temperature, there is a protocol that needs to be followed that involves someone being trained to check fevers, and they need the appropriate personal protective equipment, and they need to do the appropriate changing of gloves and hand hygiene between the screening process. Additionally, when you're looking for coronavirus, people have a range of symptoms. So just checking a fever in itself is not actually going to be protective. What you need to do is what we're trying to do is educate people on what the symptoms might be and make sure that if, as a patron, if you are feeling at all unwell, you should not be visiting an establishment. And as a staff member or an employee, if you're at all feeling unwell, you should not be going to work that day.
And then a question about, can you clarify service ending at midnight? Does that mean I have to have everyone out of the establishment at midnight?
Yes, that's correct. So the operational hours for the outdoor dining at this time is 8 a.m. to midnight. So all operations, service and sale of alcoholic beverages should cease at 12 midnight.
And I'm not sure who will take this one, but wants to know how restaurants should manage people, customers, staff walking through restaurants to get to the rooftop or into the summer garden space. Any best practices for that? And then in addition to that, what happens if there's a thunderstorm? Can customers wait inside for safety?
So the best practices for if they need to go in a restaurant to get to the garden, the rooftop, the restroom, that is allowed, but it should be no lingering, no queuing. They should have their mask on when they go, and and the food establishment should also be cleaning and sanitizing common contact surfaces, so doorknobs, things like that. They should be frequently cleaning and sanitizing those type of surfaces.
And how often should they do that for the like handrails, I assume, as well, doorknobs? How often should that cleaning, disinfectant happen?
So it depends on the rate of use and how much traffic you get through there, but we're recommending every 4 to 6 hours.
I can just add to the face mask question. So if you're an ABRA licensed establishment, their rulemaking that was released earlier today says that patrons must wear a mask when they are waiting in line or outside of the establishment prior to going in or prior to being seated. And if you have to use the restroom, you must put your mask on to go inside of the establishment to use the restroom, as well as if the seating area is in a summer garden, you must have your mask on when you enter the establishment until you are seated and eating or drinking, but otherwise your mask should be worn. Thank you.
And just a reminder, I'm happy to keep asking the questions. However, if you want to join us by phone, you could press 0 now, and that's how you can ask a question of any of the panelists. Next question is actually for Jeff. Wonderful to hear regarding permit fees, being waived. Will this also apply to establishments that already have permits issued, but that may need them to be renewed next month?
If I understand the question correctly, what we're currently looking at is if you have an existing permit, you're able to use that existing permit and renew it accordingly. If you are applying for a permit that would be in use throughout the duration of the public health emergency, there are no fees for that currently. That being said, we are not currently there shouldn't be any situation in which you are asked to pay a permit fee right now for any of the current public space use. And if we likely would handle those on a case-by-case basis.
Great. And then a question for DC Health. Are restaurants required to use disposable plates, silverware, cups?
No, that's a recommendation. But if you don't use disposable, we definitely need to clean and sanitize properly.
And this question, actually a couple of questions from Kathy Hollinger from the Restaurant Association. She asked that there's a little bit of conflicting messaging about how long an employee must be restricted from coming to work after they've been in contact with someone who is positive, defined with what come in contact with positive means, and is there a extended period of time? Is it for a full workday? Is it for 5 minutes? How do you define that?
Yeah, so exposure is defined as being in close contact with someone, and we define close contact as being within 6 feet of someone for more than 15 minutes. If that situation occurs with someone who is confirmed COVID-19 positive, then we would count you as being exposed. If you are exposed, you would need to quarantine for 14 days, starting from the time of your exposure. If you do get tested when you are quarantined, if you are negative, you still have to finish your quarantine, right? Because you can still develop symptoms during that 14-day period. That's why we ask you to quarantine.
And this kind of, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say this kind of builds on that because secondly, DC Health's recommendations say to restrict employees from the food establishment for 14 days, but we understand that some situations are being considered case by case. Will DC Health have guidelines on this to support employers?
Yeah, so we're updating our guidance documents today, but it's anyone in any situation, anyone who is exposed to someone with COVID-19 should quarantine for 14 days from the time of their exposure.
And then the third question is if an employee tests positive, are there recommendations about if it's necessary to temporarily close the restaurant for cleaning? And then a follow-up on that is, should the restaurant remain closed until all employees can be tested?
So our recommendation that we're updating on the guidance document, since we have gotten this question, is if there is a positive case in an employee or in a patron who visits the restaurant, we are asking you to be prepared to close for 24 to 48 hours to clean and sanitize the facility. And then also so that DC Health can perform an investigation to inform next steps. We need to understand when the person was there, who may have been exposed. And then we can we'll provide recommendations for when the restaurant can reopen. I think you had one more.
And then the second part of that was, should they remain closed until all employees have been tested?
So again, the duration of closure will be determined by who was exposed by the event. Testing an employee does not indicate whether that person needs to, testing an employee can influence the duration, the outcome in two ways. So if you have someone who is exposed, if they get tested, if they're negative, they have to still quarantine. That's because we know with coronavirus, if someone is exposed, they may develop symptoms anywhere from 2 to 14 days after their exposure. And the test is really looking at something at one point in time. So even if they have a negative test, they have to continue their quarantine. If they test positive, then they will need to isolate. And then DC Health will start a new round of contact tracing around the new person who is identified.
And then this one, I'm not sure if we can answer. It's, can an employer request or require employees to be tested before coming back to work, even if there wasn't a known exposure or the employee doesn't have symptoms? And will an employee be able to get access to a test in that situation?
So I think we already talked about access to testing, but employers can make, the DC Health recommendation is that employers are screening their employees when they enter the facility to ensure that the workplace is safe, not around testing.
Okay. And then a question about maximum capacity. Is there a percentage capacity? Is it 50% of the outdoor capacity, or how am I able to determine that?
Right now, there is no limit on capacity. However, with that being said, tables and chairs, tables must be, 6 feet apart. We need to still be practicing social distance. So if you have a sidewalk cafe or a summer garden or a rooftop, for that matter, you would have to have the tables to be 6 feet apart.
And there was a concern about neighbors being affected by sound levels with outdoor seating. Can you clarify, remind us about what type of music, outdoor entertainment is permitted or not?
So live entertainment is not permitted during phase 1. No DJs, soft ambient music, recorded music is allowed, and that music should not be, it shouldn't be able to be heard in any resident's home.
Okay, so we'll go to the phones now, and the first question is from Greg. Greg, can you hear us? Your line should be open now, Greg.
Yes, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have 3 questions. Can I ask all 3?
Let's see how the first one goes. No, of course you can. Go ahead, Greg.
Fair enough. First one is the mayor's office doing anything to encourage landlords to allow restaurants to use outdoor space that they own that's adjacent to the restaurant?
Interesting. Jeff, how would you talk about sort of private space and public space? Maybe that'll help answer Greg's question.
Sure. We are looking at utilizing public space, and that includes expanding sidewalk capacity, also using existing public roadway space, whether it's in the current parking lane or in a potential vehicle travel lane. The use of private space will largely depend on a case-by-case basis and in terms of who owns that space and who is willing to permit its use. So for the purposes of going through the application through DDOT's process, we're looking at the use of public space for expansion, and then private space is treated separately depending on the type of private space.
And Greg, I would also say that a lot of what Sean Townsend and his office does is make sure that all stakeholders' kind of concerns are heard. And so I would also volunteer Sean to help, because I think this is something that he's dealt with in the past as well. Sean?
I can just piggyback on what Jeff stated. I know that ABRA has a program that they rolled out a couple of weeks ago for pop-up operations. So currently, an ABRA licensee who would like to, add a second location to their operations can utilize a vacant sidewalk cafe space. They would just need to register on ABRA's website. Of course, that would also require you to get permission from the business or the landlord of that space that you're seeking to occupy. And it's a simple process, and it's on ABRA's website. So yeah, that's available now.
All right, Greg, your next question?
Okay, thank you. The second question is, if we have a number of patrons in our outdoor space and there's a downpour, can they go inside temporarily until the downpour passes?
That's a great question. So, no, the recommendation from DC Health is if it starts to rain, then the patrons should get their meals to go. We do not want to create a situation where we have packed restaurants.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. The last question is for a commercial property owner like me who didn't get rent from a restaurant tenant for about 1.5 years and got a court order for an eviction, and the court order happened months before the emergency started. Is the mayor's office willing to consider allowing those kinds of evictions to proceed because it didn't have anything to do with the current emergency? And now we're sitting with a vacant building for, months ahead.
So while we have a lot of expertise up on this panel, we I don't think have a lawyer here, and I wouldn't want to adjudicate a specific instance of that without knowing kind of more of the detail, and I'm not sure even what our role exactly would be, but I will ask that Sean is available if you want to send him some information, and he could maybe get a better understanding of what you're facing. So we'll next go to our caller on the line, which is Gordon. Gordon, can you hear us? Gordon, are you with us?
Hi, sorry about that.
No problem.
My name is Gordon Chaffin. I'm a reporter. My question is about the safety measures that are needed to be taken for public space. Will DDOT require the installation of concrete jersey barriers or similar protection for outdoor dining space, or will you be able to use lighter materials?
Thanks for that question, Gordon. The simple answer is it depends on the type of closure that we're talking about, but it will be a range of materials depending on the type of road, the type of closure. It's our intent to work with applicants, both individual applicants and also business improvement districts and main streets to determine what is most appropriate for those individual circumstances.
And then, Jeff, actually a follow-up question that we got via social media is there any new term, streetery zones that will be set up for food trucks that they're able to access?
Deputy Mayor, that is a great question, and one that we may need to follow up on after this call.
So the one thing I would say to that questioner is that what we have done today is we laid out on coronavirus.dc.gov/phase1 the application process for the use of public space. We're looking for the creative ideas that you may have working with a BID, a Main Street, or some other community organization in order to propose to us what you think could work. So I think, Jeff, if it's okay with you, I think it would be good to say that if they had a place to do it,
sure,
if they wanted to apply and showed that they had stakeholders engaged and involved in it, that's something we would look at. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I mean we would treat a food truck the same as we would now in terms of where it could go on a particular roadway. So yes, I think that's definitely fair to say.
Okay, so we have another caller, Valerie. Valerie, can you hear us? Valerie, your line should be open.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Valerie Cupp. I'm a restaurant owner in DuPont. My question was about inspections of the patio. We actually did get the permit for the outdoor cafe a few months ago, but we never had an inspection done. It is bolted into the ground, so it's a permanent structure. We had contacted DDOT about coming out for inspection, but I know things are not moving as quickly as they normally would. Are we okay to operate without the inspection? And then secondly, for those restaurants that don't have the DDOT permit but are putting up something temporarily to take advantage of these new opportunities, should they be expecting an inspection as well?
Valerie, thanks for that question. I would encourage you to visit the coronavirus.dc.gov/phase1 website and fill out the registration form so that we're ensuring that we're addressing all of your questions and concerns. It's our intent to do this as quickly as possible and to get all of the agencies that have the necessary review to do so in one seamless process. So just to ensure that we've got all of those bases covered, I would encourage you to fill out that form, and we'll follow up directly with you if there are any needs that we need to see met.
And Jeff, for us, if it seemed like Valerie was saying that she had a application that was in pre-pandemic and was just waiting for the inspection, how should she follow up on that too?
Got it. If you have an application that you are waiting to hear on, we will follow up with you directly and treat it as if you were applying for it during this phase.
Okay. Next, we have a question, I think for DC Health. that if a customer is positive and they came to our restaurant, would we get a follow-up call from a contact tracer or DC Health? Is that why we're doing reservations? What comes after that?
Yeah, so if there's a customer who is then diagnosed, who we find out when we're doing our interviews that visited a restaurant, we will reach out to that restaurant and provide guidance on what the next steps are for the restaurant.
Okay. And then a question about, well, two questions. One, are private restaurants, social clubs, able to apply for this new outdoor space application?
Yes, they should go online and submit an application. This will, just so we're clear, this registration process will register you for any DDOT sidewalk cafe permits that may be needed, and it also registers you for being able to serve alcohol outdoors as well. So it's a two-pronged process, all in one place. So yes, for the social club, if they would like to, expand outdoors, as long as they're serving food, they should register.
Okay. And then who has to have the liability insurance for a streetery application?
So there, on the application itself, there is a specific checkbox for insurance, and our Office of Risk Management will be reviewing those to make sure that every individual business, or in some cases, if there are clusters of businesses, that in each situation that there's the adequate amount of insurance.
And for those who are listening on the phone, if you have a question, you could press 0 now, and that will get you into the queue to ask a question. We do have Bob. Bob, can you hear us? Your line should be open. Bob, can you hear us?
Yes, Bob is here. So the question is there a requirement to use disposable napkins and linen versus actual linens?
No, there is no requirement for that. That's a recommendation, but there is no requirement for that. Just keep in mind, if you're using reusable, it has to be cleaned and sanitized appropriately. I just want to note, it's important to clean and sanitize. If you do one without the other, it's not effective. So we need to clean and sanitize.
And then like tablecloths and linens that are sometimes left on the table, how should those be handled?
So if we're talking about reusable, it needs to be removed between each party.
Okay. And then I think we had this question earlier, but how should an employer handle a customer who refuses to wear a mask?
I think that might be something that we have to
Yeah, so I think the one thing that I would say is that, one, we do think that it's appropriate, and I think there's a graphic on coronavirus.dc.gov that can be posted at the front of the business in order to ensure that people know that they have to wear a mask, and it is okay for someone to be refused entrance to an establishment without wearing a mask, as long as it's not something that they can't do because of ADA issue. So that's how we would handle that one and the advice that we'd give. But that would be listed, those graphics and such are listed on coronavirus.dc.gov. And I'll look to our folks who are doing the calls to see if there's any other calls. Any other final thoughts, Jeff? Sean?
I'd just like to add on the outdoor piece. I know there was a question about inclement weather, and umbrellas, awnings, and tents with no walls, with no sides on them, are permissible outside. So, and then also we do encourage restaurants and operators to continue to have takeout equipment or takeout containers readily available in the event that we do have a quick storm that comes out of nowhere. Just have those things readily available so that patrons could, so you can assist patrons with packing up if they choose to leave.
And we have a question on the phone from Heather. Heather, can you hear us? Heather, your line should be open.
Yes, I'm here.
Great. What's your question?
Yes. Thank you for this forum. So many people are awaiting the partial opening of restaurants. My question addresses public space. In quite a number of sidewalks, it's really difficult for pedestrians, especially older pedestrians or people using wheelchairs and walkers to get through. What are the provisions to allocate appropriately the use of that public space on the sidewalk? I'm thinking in particular, for example, of the 3 blocks on South 8th Street, Southeast, south of Pennsylvania Avenue, where it's incredibly difficult to maneuver along the west side of the sidewalk. So I'm interested whether there is any contemplation of expansion of sidewalks and how you're thinking of making sure there's accessibility.
That's a really good question, Heather. We'll have Jeff Meridian talk about that a bit.
Thanks, Heather. Yes, absolutely. In everything that we've talked about today, ADA accessibility and ensuring that there are safe and legally required sidewalks is our priority. And we are, as you may know, we have already begun a process over the past several weeks of expanding sidewalk capacity in areas where we know there are essential businesses and are likely to have a large volume of pedestrians. We will continue to do that work on top of ensuring the expansion for restaurants and businesses. In every case, we will make sure that there is adequate sidewalk room for pedestrians.
And I think that was our final question. So we want to thank everybody for joining us. Sorry for the technical difficulty with the call-in service, but we will continue to post information on coronavirus.dc.gov. Phase 1 is where all of the, you'll find the mayor's order, DC Health guidance, as well as the ABRA rulemaking from this week. It's also where you'll find the application for the use of public space or additional use of private space. So if you have any questions, you can continue to look to that page and then reach out to the folks here if you can't find that answer. And I'll make sure that Sean shares his email address with everybody so that they have that as the point of contact so that you don't have to navigate each and every agency. Sean?
My email address is Sean, SHAWN, Townsend, TOWNSEND, @DC.gov, and I'm scared of what I'm going to see.
No, I think there are a lot of questions out there, but I think the one good thing about doing these forums is it gives us an opportunity to update our guidance that we have and make sure that we make it as crisp as possible. So we appreciate everybody who participated, the questions that were received. Also, just sort of a programming note that on Monday, DC Health is going to do another TeleTownhall just to focus a little bit more on those questions about how employers and employees will interact and what to do if someone gets infected. But again, we can't stress enough, if you go to coronavirus.dc.gov/phase1, that's where you'll find the mayor's order, the DC Health guidance, and the ABRA rulemaking in order to make all the decisions that you have to make as we enter into phase 1 here. So thank you everybody for joining us, and please continue to be safe.